Meeting is taking place in a hybrid format. Pursuant to the standing orders, members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. I would like to make a few comments on the benefits of the members and witnesses. Before speaking, please wait until I recognize you by name. For those participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic. And please mute yourself when you are not speaking. Those in the room, your mic will be controlled by the proceeding and verification officer. A reminder that all comments should be addressed to the chair with regards to a speaking list, the committee clerk, and I will do the best we can to maintain speaking order for all members, whether they are participating virtually or in person. So pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Monday, November 27, 2023, the committee will resume its study of the implementation of a red dress alert. I would like to welcome our witnesses as an individual. Laurie Campbell, Associate Vice President, Indigenous Engagement, University of Regina. MKO Sheila North, and Dr. Anita Oskan Harper. And we have, this is the panel. So I would now like to start with Laurie Campbell. You will each have 5 minutes for opening remarks, followed by a round of questions. And now the mic is over to you. Yes, you can start.
Any of us?
Laurie Campbell.
Tansei, hello. Good morning, everyone. This morning I will begin in Cree as a way to honor the undeniable strength and perseverance of my ancestors for working so hard to maintain our language and with it our culture, our way of life, and our beliefs in the interconnectedness and resilience of life. Nanasko mamoi otawa ma mitani miwasen kotaki sigawe wapa tamak. Laurie Campbell nitsikason. Moni awi sagahigini kitsiasot tamatawin kiwitino Saskatchewan ochi niamaga uskanaka sastaki sawanok nawigan. Nia two-spirit tastawiniwak nehiao apitiko sasana squayo. I started off by giving a short thank you to the Creator because it's so beautiful that we get to see another day, especially when so many of our relatives and ancestors have had that right stolen from them. In fact, recent reports indicate that there are well over 4,000 Indigenous women, girls, and two-spirit people who have had this right stolen from them in the last few decades because they were Indigenous. I introduced myself and said that my family is from Montreal Lake, Cree Nation, Treaty 6 territory in northern Saskatchewan, but that I live in the south in Regina. I said that I am a two-spirit Cree Métis woman. I am the granddaughter of a residential school survivor and a child from the 60s scoop generation. One of the things that I am most proud of is that over the course of 25 years, I was able to locate my birth mom and all 6 of my living siblings who had been dispersed across several provinces at various young ages. I have the privilege of holding the position of Associate Vice President, Indigenous Engagement at the University of Regina. But today, I share my statement with you as a proud, unapologetic Tastawiniwak Neheo Pitiko Sasanasqueo, despite the systems that have worked to keep me and others like me from holding our heads high and speaking, even though our voices may shake in rooms like this, in spaces that were never meant for us. I choose to share with you who I am because it tells you where I come from, and it tells you a bit about the lens through which I experience this world. And it is relevant to why I'm speaking here today about the importance of the red dress alert. I want to share with you 2 personal stories. As I sit here, I'm reminded that my auntie, Maria Campbell, once stood in this building nearly 60 years ago, right in the House of Commons, to share testimony about the struggles of Indigenous women. She had hoped that the stories she shared might change hearts and minds, that the rest of Canadians would see Indigenous women as mothers, children, aunties, and cookums who are loved and valued. and she wanted it recognized that the addictions, poverty, and violence in our communities are not cultural traits or human deficits, but rather symptoms of a people struggling to live through a government-created destruction of their world. My auntie shared the important truths that the community had asked her to share, but it fell on deaf ears. Do you know what they reported about her in the paper the next day? It said that a beautiful young Native girl said that there were a lot of problems in their communities, and that is it. They were the problem. There was no recognition of the harm caused through the residential school system, the reserve system, the welfare system, and no recognition of the systemic racism that allowed Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit community members to be hunted, stolen, and murdered. I mentioned earlier that I am from the 60 Scoop. I was taken from my birth mom when I was 14 months old because of violence towards her and me by a non-Indigenous man in our home. When Mom called the police for help, they took me away, not the white man. She thought it was temporary, that they would bring me back when he left. Instead, they put me in care and adopted me out. It took me 25 years to find her again. My mom had come across many dangerous and violent men in her lifetime, and the way that she took control of that was to start to make them pay for it. She was a street worker her entire career. She saw no other options. Yesterday, I told her I was coming here to speak with you today about the Red Dress Alert, and she said that this program is so important. There have been so many that she has personally known who have gone missing or been murdered. People target us because we are Aboriginal, she told me. She has had a gun pulled on her several times. I asked her if she ever told the police. No, she said. There was no point. They wouldn't do anything. We had to rely on each other to keep ourselves safe, and it's no different today. When I finally met my birth mom after years of searching, she quietly told me that she was scared to find me. She was worried I would be angry. Strangely, not because of her past addictions or her career as a sex worker, but because she had made me an Indian. And I ask you to sit with that for a moment. It still tears my heart. She was worried that I would be mad at her because she brought me into this world with a target on my back, simply because she brought an Indigenous Two-Spirit girl child into this world. I made a decision right then and there that I would stand tall and be unapologetically proud of my indigeneity in a way that she never had opportunity to. Recent national statistics reflect that 0.8 per 100,000 non-Indigenous women are murdered every year, but that 4.31 per 100,000 Indigenous women are murdered during that same time frame. On a large scale like that, it may seem inconsequential, but let's look at it in the context of my home province of Saskatchewan. We are in a province of just over 1 million people, including approximately 500,000 women. In 1 year, those statistics translate to the murdering of 5 non-Indigenous women and 26 Indigenous women. If those numbers were reversed, something would have already been done about it, and I don't mean further studies. Over the past few years, I've seen good intentions go bad because Indigenous leaders, Indigenous professionals, and experts and Indigenous community members have not been able to lead the work intended to have meaningful impact in their own communities. The Red Dress Alert program must be adequately resourced, and it must be Indigenous-led. The MMIW inquiry called for justice reform to make systemic changes to ensure the justice system is culturally appropriate.
Thank you, Ms. Campbell. Unfortunately, your time is over. You always can answer in the question rounds. Thank you. Now we'll move to MKP. Next person, Sheila North.
Anus danse Sheila North is negaswan ban Barnaby creation in Otse. Neminenten as an old de Bertiane Beat to Monge on Agiskenta Manuma and Mutigadeg, the square August Diego Gakinaukitan in Nimenanak, the Minubanehiguzi Matiswino Agitom. Hi everyone, my name is Sheila North. I'm from the Ben Barnaby Cree Nation in northern Manitoba, and in Cree to also acknowledge my ancestors and to honor our Cree and sovereignty. I introduced myself and told you where I'm from in Bunbonabee Cree Nation in northern Manitoba. I'm glad to be here with all of you to share some knowledge and some thoughts on what we're talking about today, the Red Dress Alert. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, committee members. Thank you especially, Leah Gazan, for bringing us all together in this way and raising the importance of this Red Dress Alert and all the championing that you've done alongside with all of us at grassroots level. Also thank the Creator for having us today and all the people from these original lands, these ancestral lands. as well as my good friend, Dr. Anita Olson-Harper, who's here with me as a support. And I have to mention that she's also the wife of my good friend, the late Elijah Harper. So I'm very honored that she's here with us today, and she has much more reason to be here than I do, and because she's such a beautiful person and one of our greatest academics in our country. I also want to acknowledge my parents for having the courage to be good parents, even though that we've seen the struggles our country has gone through and still continues to be for Indigenous people. And I want to acknowledge all the women and girls and families and allies and supports who have always raised awareness about MMIW, MMIWG, relatives all over our country and also over North America. I saw the tireless effort that they've given to bring us to where we're at, that we're able to talk about what we're talking about today. I also want to tell you a little bit about my perspective, so it gives you some insight of who I am and where I come from and why I'm talking to you about what I am. I'm a Kukum, a grandmother of one, a mom of two. I come from two large, beautiful Cree families, and I'm thankful to have been raised by Gilbert and Sadie North, residential school survivor and day school survivor. I grew up in Bonbonamy until I went to high school as a teen, and it was a huge culture shock to go from my reserve to the city in Winnipeg. I almost lost my life a few times on the streets during that time in transition. So I consider myself a survivor. I'm also a former journalist. I worked in radio, television, and the web as a reporter for about 15 years for CBC and CTV in Manitoba. I also realized my lifelong dream to be an anchor, so I'm very happy about that. I'm also a former Grand Chief of Manitoba, Kiwetanawi Okimakanak in 2015 to 2018. Most of my work and my life has involved the work around missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. In one of my roles as a communications officer, I created the hashtag MMIW in 2012 to link conversations, families, advocates, and allies together. When I first started working as a journalist and tackling MMIW stories in 2005, I realized then I was a survivor. Since then, I've worked in many capacities to raise awareness or to advocate for MMIW over the years. In doing so, I wanted to drive home here in the common theme that kept coming up when I talked to families and friends of victims and survivors of MMIWG2+, and that is the responses by police. Most of my experiences have been cases handled by Winnipeg Police Service and the RCMP in Manitoba. That common theme is police attitudes and responses to families and friends who looked to them for help in finding their loved ones. I can say in all of the stories I've ever done for the media and all the stories I've ever heard, police were either dismissive, condescending, and disrespectful. In one story, Gail Niepenak was looking for her sister and put posters of her sister in downtown Winnipeg, and it took 10 days for the police to respond to her. They didn't respond to her until I did a story on CBC saying that she was looking for her. And the worst part was when she did finally reach police to talk to her, they told her that she's an adult, she can go wherever she wants, maybe she went on vacation, which was a big slap in the face for Gail, because Tanya only had $5 in her pocket, and she said that our families can't afford to go on vacations. In another story, a young woman from Portage la Prairie, Jennifer Catchaway, went missing from her family, just west of Winnipeg. It took many days for the RCMP to talk to her mom, Bernice. When Bernice finally got a hold of the RCMP to report her missing, the police said, "Oh, Jen is probably on a drunken bender. Wait for her to get home. She'll be back soon." And unfortunately, around 4 months after that incident, a young, beautiful, blonde, blue-eyed woman went missing also 4 months after from the same city. And what do you think the response from the police was at that time? I was working at CBC at the time, and both mothers, I talked to them on the same day, and this beautiful woman, which she deserved, that response from the RCMP was they were very respectful, and they got a search going. They got the word out that she was missing. I did ask the RCMP why there was differences in how they talked to both mothers and the spokesperson at the time, RC, if I can still remember her name, she berated me and she attacked me and called me, said that I was being racist, that I was accusing the RC of being racist. Both women deserve justice, both families deserve respect, but that's not what happened. Unfortunately, these are just 2 examples, and I share them with permission from the 2 families. And I believe that the red dress alert needs oversight by families and grassroots people for it to be effective. Many of the police forces across the country have eroded the trust of many MMIW families and survivors and are not trusted to do the right thing on their own and to report on all cases of missing loved ones in a timely and respectful manner.
Thank you, Ms. North. Now we'll move over to Dr. Anita Olson-Halper.
Good morning, Bushu. Nishinikas Anita Olson-Harper. Winkia Niminwentan Hu'umaheayayan. That means I'm very happy to be here and thankfully for Sheila that I've been invited. And I'm not going to speak as long as Sheila has or Lori, but I am here as a support for Sheila. And just to say that sort of like a land acknowledgement, I always turn these more into a people acknowledgement, and I'm always thankful for our ancestors who left this land, all of it, in the wonderful pristine conditions that they left it in when the colonizers came over from Europe and other places. So as an academic, and I did my PhD in domestic violence in our communities, which is incredibly high. And of course, there's a great correlation between that and the missing, murdered Indigenous women and girls. And as far as the red dress alert, I would say it is nothing for us without us. So as Indigenous women who are especially on reserve, but Indigenous women also who have positions and places in Canadian society, that we do the active participation, we do the active leadership of it, and we can also view that as an act of reconciliation. And it's not so much that we are awaiting the go-ahead for us to take the leadership. We just do it. And I am Anishinaabe from Northwestern Ontario, from the Lac Seul First Nation, and I've done a lot of work in the area of violence against women, but I am now with Movember. They're the mustache people, and I work a lot with Indigenous men, inmates in federal prisons. And when I talked to them, I realized that their homes were raised in violence and chaos. And if we can get a handle on that, because we're so used to being the bad people, the bad men, the bad women who are targeted for violence. And the red dress alert, again, it should be grassroots and Indigenous women all over in Canada societies. And thank you. Miigwech.
Thank you, Dr. Harper. Now we're going to start our first round of questions with 6 minutes. We'll start with Michelle. Michelle, over to you.
Thank you, Chair Miigwech, to our witnesses. Powerful testimony here today as we further study the red dress alert, and so much to unpack in each one of what you guys have brought forward. And I think the real mission of this study is as you see in the motion, an examination of a most effective and efficient manner to operate, administer, and control such an alert system. So it's really trying to hash out how we ensure that it works, right? I think those are going to be the critical pieces. Ms. Campbell, if I can start with you, you gave some numbers, and I think numbers are really valuable because I think when you can see the numbers of what's happening, and then if this, and everybody, I think we have unanimous consent around the table. We all support this red dress alert. If the red dress alert, or when the red dress alert is implemented, what do those numbers look like? So if you could reiterate the numbers of missing or murdered, if you have them handy, and if you need a minute, I can go to someone else while you grab them. It's okay. You take your time to grab those. While you do that, I'm actually going to go over to Miss Harper because Miss Olson Harper, your testimony is really profound, and I think offline when we're having these conversations, this study is about the red dress alert and it's an intervention, but upstream in domestic violence, your comments are very well suited for this committee when we look at the status of women. One of the things I've spoken a lot with men who've been incarcerated is they say they come out worse than when they go in. They don't have access to programming. And we've heard testimony in other studies that behavior is communication, right? And we understand why somebody is doing what they're doing to help them redirect that. So I just want to say thank you for saying that because I think we have a lot of work to do. And I'll go back over to Ms. Campbell for those numbers.
Thank you. So I had said 0.8 per 100,000 non-Indigenous women are murdered every year, but 4.31 per 100,000 Indigenous women. And then I just kind of broke it down for what that would look like in Saskatchewan, which would be 5 non-Indigenous compared to 26. And in a province the size of Saskatchewan, like I would think everybody would be alarmed by those numbers. As far as, I mean, what I think the alert, in talking with my mom yesterday about this, we see, and MP Gazin has spoken about the Amber Alert and about how about 80% of the children have been found and located. Mm-hmm. And we need a system that isn't optional to opt in, like the Aboriginal Alert is kind of optional. People can look at it. But we need a system that is put out there so everybody sees it, so those faces are out there, so that we can have that same kind of response. And I would, as an academic and a researcher, I would see that we would have a great number more found safely. And we know time is important, right? Waiting 10 days to start the look is often too late already.
Yeah, I really appreciate those numbers. I think that 80% number, when you look at the Amber Alert, 80% success, that's 80% lives, right? So that's why I think it's really important to have on the record that number of what that can transfer like. To Miss North, I commend you on your hashtag. I think we live in a digital age, and with that comes a double-edged sword. It's not always been the best thing for our children and all of those things, but it also has the capacity to do that. Do you see, I guess, looking at your background in that and being able to get a hashtag that really resonated with folks and is easy to understand, do you see that as part of this red dress alert as well?
I think it still connects us all together. It ties us in some way. It ties us together in a lot of ways. And digitally, we know that Red Dress Alert has to have a digital component, and MMIW is also very digital. So, yeah, it has to keep us connected to remind us what the problems are. And as far as numbers, also, I wanted to add that we know officially NWAC had numbers and RCMP had numbers. The last official number I've ever heard from RCMP was 1182 missing and murdered in Canada, and that was quite a few years ago, probably 2013 or 2012, and they haven't updated the numbers, but we know there's probably 3 or 4 times more that number, and nobody has been able to get that real number or the true number anymore. It hasn't been worked on, it hasn't been a priority, so that has to be a factor as well.
I think data is the driving force behind efficiency, right? If you don't have the numbers, you can't really do that, and those numbers need to be changed for certain. How much time do I have left, Madam Chair?
44 seconds.
Okay, perfect. So I guess that the last thing, and just ensuring when we look at this, for Indigenous, by Indigenous, we've heard that from multiple witnesses. I think that's fair. Do any of you, in a short amount of time, have recommendations to put into this report of what that looks like from a federal rollout perspective of how that is implemented and still having a sort of key operator? How do you see it? Do you see it as the minister operating this? How do you see it rolling out?
I think there's already best practices probably from the Amber Alert, the Silver Alert. There are best practices there already, but I think the standards of what is going to look like should be set way ahead of time, but with a major involvement from grassroots people and academics like Lori and Dr. Olson Harper here, and people that have gone through it and people that know the realities. So I think the standards and coming up with what constitutes a red dress alert, that has to be with grassroots first and academics and allies before it even gets there. The mechanics of it, when it finally rolls out, I think it'll be easier once these systems have been put in place by the people themselves.
Thank you, Ms. North. Now we will go over to Anita.
And thank you, Madam Chair. I want to thank all three of our witnesses, not just for your testimony today, but for the incredible work that you do every single day. And I have a question for each of you. I'm going to start with Ms. Campbell. First of all, I wanted to also offer you a few moments because I saw that at the end of your speaking time, you didn't quite finish your remarks. If you want to take some moments now to do that.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. It was nearly done, but had a couple sort of summary points. So the creation, or the MMIW inquiry called for justice reform to make systemic changes to ensure the justice system is culturally appropriate. The creation of a nationwide red dress alert program is a tangible step for the federal government to take to end the ongoing genocide of missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit people. As MP Gazin has said, response times to reports of missing Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirits people are far too slow. A red dress alert similar to the Amber Alert would make a difference. It's fairly simple what we as Indigenous people are asking for, the same care and attention and respect afforded to the rest of the population. Believe that we can find solutions and lead the way. And I think that's one of the things that is often missing, and we saw it even in the inquiry, where it wasn't able to be Indigenous-led, even though we had Indigenous professionals and experts and community members in the room. The oversight by the government was too much to allow it to move ahead the way it needs to be. Anyways, yes, thank you.
No, thank you very much for that. And I also noted in your testimony, referring back 60 years to your aunt's testimony, and I just want to say that I think we all share a determination that the outcomes and the actions of the testimony today will actually lead to change. So thank you for that. The question that I have for you is, we've heard a lot about the impact on women and girls, but not as much about Two-Spirit peoples. And I just wanted to give you a moment to talk about the unique realities and the ways in which Two-Spirit peoples would be even more impacted, and whether or not there may be things that need to be done specifically or uniquely for that group of people.
Yeah, I mean, exponentially, with the intersection of being Two-Spirit, we know just in the general population how much more significantly queer people are targeted. But then within the Indigenous community, you add on being a woman, being Indigenous, and being Two-Spirit, exponentially again causes harm, and our access to resources exponentially less there from the policing service and all those types of things. And I remember years ago, nearly 30 years ago, working at the youth center, and we had a young Two-Spirit individual that attended there, and he was murdered in the streets of Regina, just for being who he was, and that part, things like that were never reported. So that part of it wasn't reported, and so I think that's where even as an academic, the statistics, the data is not there. I think partly because people like to erase it as well, and not to consider it as an issue.
Thank you, and that leads actually very well into my next question for Ms. North, which is about that invisibility that you spoke about. And you were a journalist, and so I just would like to get your sense and your perspective about publicity. And we know that there is a difference in terms of who is actually seen and who is mentioned in media or publicized. Is there a way we can turn that in the favor in an Amber Alert or in a red dress alert, where we can turn that publicity into a good thing and make Indigenous women and girls and Two-Spirit less invisible in the public realm?
And I think the the presence of our people and our faces and our names has been a long time coming in the media. In 2005, we were in the media. We were still calling victims prostitutes, street workers, and living, precarious lives. We were describing victims as that. So we have come a long way to now, but media can't be the only ones raising awareness about the who's missing and who needs awareness. I think that media does get it right a lot of times, but at the same time, it doesn't do a thorough job. It's left to editorialize a lot of it. And again, I coming from that journalist background, I know that there's a lot of good intentions by journalists and people who decide what gets on the news. But at the same time, we all have systems that we learned about, and the way we treat Indigenous people in our country is a systemic issue that also reaches journalism and the media. So we need an Amber Alert that distinctly talks about who is missing, who needs help right now, because I think when we see missing persons report, which you can probably watch any newscast across the country, you'll probably find at least one a day, but they get lost now in the system. They get lost because people start paying attention to the media on these reports. So if we can get it on our phone and have the same importance as when a child or a silver person goes missing, then that'll be better.
Thank you so much. And that goes to my question to Ms. Dr. Olson-Harper, and you only have 10 seconds, I think. You said that there's a stigma on it's bad people, and that really struck me. And 10 seconds, can she answer? No. Okay, maybe in the next round, because that goes to that whole thing. So thank you.
Thank you. Now we are moving to Block. Andrea, for 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Thank you to our three witnesses. Yes, I'll give you the time to put your earpieces on. I thank our three witnesses for being here. Madam Chair, could we stop? Because I think somebody is having a difficulty here. I'll start again, Madam Chair. I want, first of all, to thank our three witnesses for being with us today. Your testimony is as impressive as your curriculum vitae. You have enormous, excellent baggage that you are bringing to this study, and I thank you for it. I do have questions for the three witnesses. First, Ms. Campbell, in your preliminary remarks, you spoke about sufficient resources that would have to be in place to accompany the implementation of the red dress alert. So can you expand on what these resources would be? What would the sufficient resources be?
Well, when I'm thinking about the sufficient resources, I guess I'm thinking from the perspective of knowing that this isn't a new problem, that it's not something that occurred in the last year or two, and so this isn't a project. This is a long-term investment. There's been a long-term investment that has had us hunted, stolen, and murdered, and that the resources that would go into this would be committed to long-term investment. Like the other, the Amber Alert and other things like that. I mean, I don't have a dollar value, but it needs to be able to be done and done well in order to have impact. We can't have organizations having to reapply for funding every year in order to continue this work.
So, when you talk about sufficient resources, you are talking about recurring funding. and that it would be ongoing. That would be your priority, would it not be? Ms. North, you spoke about someone who was deceased, an Indigenous person in Portage la Prairie who disappeared. And you spoke about the white woman who disappeared and the way in which these two disappearances were treated. Were they able to save the woman who disappeared in Portage la Prairie, the Indigenous woman?
Been found. And I don't think the family of the non-Indigenous woman don't feel that justice has been done either. Both families deserve justice, but I think that they saw the failures of and inadequacies of the RCMP.
But do you think that then a red dress alert would have helped find the woman who disappeared at the time if it had been in place and sent out at the time? Would she have been saved?
It would have definitely made a difference. They wouldn't have been waiting days to hear a response from the RCMP and then told to wait a little bit longer. It would have been instant. When the RCMP learned about the second woman, it was instant. The word was out, media was out there. There was people arm in arm, walking arm in arm in the fields in Portage la Prairie looking for this woman. The same search was not done for Jennifer Catchaway.
Merci.
Thank you. This brings me to my next question for Ms. Harper. You spoke in your opening remarks about reconciliation. How would a red dress alert be part of this important notion of working towards a reconciliation, a nation-to-nation dialogue, given all the harm that may well have been done in the past by the RCMP, as outlined by Ms. North? How do you see this necessary reconciliation taking place?
I think, first of all, we would have to know about the history of colonialism and also the history of pre-contact times when our families looked out for each other, when there were the gender roles were complementarity between men and women. And if we could find a way to get back to that, because reconciliation is everybody's effort, right? It's not an Indigenous effort. Part of it is, but a part of it is the non-Indigenous component of society on that. It's everybody's job. So it's working together and with the goal of where our family members can be cohesive, holistic in our growth and development, and protecting each other. And then, of course, that's really easy for me to say. But at the same time, we live in I'll use the word chaotic society, where we don't have that cohesiveness. Even on our reserves, it's not cohesive where we are able to look after each other. One reason being entrenched poverty. No, it's not just a poor family being poor for a time. It's entrenched. And also because... yeah, we definitely have to know that colonialism is ongoing. It's not something in the past. There's neo-colonialism also going on, and reconciliation between the two groups can certainly help that along, and it should, especially with the findings of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission.
Thank you, Dr. Harper. Now we move to NTP. Leah, go for 6 minutes.
Thank you so much. I just want to start out by saying it's such an honor to know all of you that are here today. I feel very privileged. I wanted to, and thank you for being here. I also wanted to thank the families of Tanya Nepanak and Jennifer Catchaway, who I also know very well for being so courageous to share their family story, and your mom, Lori. These are difficult stories and marred in stigma. And I want to thank your mother for allowing you to share her story through you. And I, too, have a mom that went through child welfare. And I was lucky that she turned out just like you, Lori, a scholar, brilliant, brave, and wonderful. It's an honor to know you as well. My first question is for you, Lori Campbell. I wanted to talk specifically about child welfare. We know that child welfare is a pipeline to MMIWG. I think also within that, we know that women who lose their children, we know statistically it results often in like a downward spiral, emotionally. Often kids in child welfare, we know, are invisible. Like they don't have family connection, they don't have community connection. I ask that because when we're looking at oversight, why is it important for oversight to be independent, grassroots-led by women, to Spirit and other advocates and survivors and family members?
Well, I think because we're outside of those systems. Like we bear the brunt of the impact of those systems, and when it comes down to, like my mom said, like she didn't tell the police because there was nothing that was going to be done. It's like we talk to each other. We know best how to care for each other and how to protect one another. And what we need is for those voices to be heard and the resources available so that that work can be done.
So I'm talking specifically about frontline organizations. Like, for example, in your testimony, you spoke about how, you found your family, but up until that time, you were kind of alone.
Oh, absolutely.
Why is it important for front organizations that are on the front line of these issues to have involvement, especially in cases where there is no connection to family?
Oh, I mean, like our elders say, knowing who you are is really, it changes the world. It helps you to be a whole person, and having that connection. The system does not help with that. I only found out who I was because I'm a good researcher, but the system does not provide us that information. But we do need that support in order to do that, to be able to make those connections. When we know who we are, we feel better about ourselves. We have our confidence, and we're able to be connected, and people are able to watch out for us in ways that they don't when we're just in a system and just another kid in a system.
Okay, my next question is for you, Sheila. I know that when you were the Grand Chief of MKO, there was an initiative of reconciliation, in fact, working with the RCMP around improving the systemic racism within the police force. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about that very briefly and share how if you were pleased with the outcomes, and if you could offer some suggestions on how it could be improved a little bit. That's a big, tall order in 2 minutes, right?
Sure. I'll just say that, as a journalist and then also as a leader of my nations, I saw the differences of how police treated even me as in either of those roles. I was berated many times as a reporter for asking pointed questions. And when I became a leader, I asked the head of the Winnipeg Police at the time what that was all about, and he showed up in full tactical gear, and I think it was an intimidation tactic to me when I look at it in retrospect. And they tried to intimidate me to not ask questions or to make points where I was trying to hold them accountable, and that's been my experience. And I was put on 2 committees, one for Winnipeg Police and one with the RCMP that Anita and I were also a part of. And we were welcomed and we were asked for questions and our opinions, but as soon as we got really tough on them and really pointed and really direct, we were disconnected. They stopped asking us questions. They stopped inviting us for answers, and that's the way it is now. We have no closure from either of those councils, and they've dishonored our people by not having proper closure.
So I think part of it is like, opening up a can of worms, right? I think if anything in the red dress study, what we're finding out is that the trust is eroded, and it's not just a feeling; it's a result of ongoing systemic racism. I would say that your examples of the Neepanak and Catchaway family are that. I know the Catchaway family and the Neepanak family are still actively searching for their loved ones. We've talked about, certainly pretty much all the witnesses have spoken about the importance of it being Indigenous-led. Just for a matter of question, do you think it's possible for, due to the history, due to the ongoing behavior, for police to be involved in this process?
They need to be involved. They need to be involved. It's not on yet.
Yeah, it's on now. Yeah.
They need to be involved because they need to learn about the issue themselves properly, and they need to be taught, and they need to do their jobs. And I have to say there's a distinction between the First Nations police forces. I've had better time and better luck in having these conversations with First Nations police forces. But the non-Indigenous ones have been very difficult. It's been hit or miss, and that's why I feel that they also need to stay involved because they need to know what their role is and support the families properly. But they can't do it solely. We see what's happening with Thunder Bay policing and the things that are coming out there. That's just an example. I would say an inquiry like that or an inquiry into policing needs to happen because this has been the common thread for our people, not just for this issue, but for our people across this country, and it's disparaging. And I have to also mention one more thing. So Tanya Neepanak is still in the landfill, presumably in the landfill in Winnipeg. And since 2009, they did a very short search for her, and they still haven't found her. So,
just going to second round, 4 minute, and just start from the Dominic.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. C'est trop d'abord.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I'll try to be as concise as possible. And thank you to our witnesses. I hope you can hear me. Can you hear me? I'm very happy, Ms. North, to hear what you have to say about the presence and the law enforcement provided by the RCMP. In Quebec, we have our own. It's called the SQ, the Sécurité du Québec. But we have heard people say that they have zero confidence in the police from our witnesses. Ms. Harper, if my information is correct, you are presently the principal advisor for the reconciliation team where you work with the RCMP. Is that still the case?
No, it's not. I did write a report on how the RCMP could do reconciliation with the First Nations and the Métis and the Inuit in Canada. That report, it resulted in a national strategy for reconciliation, which I was not a part of, and which says something, right? And I don't know where that's at.
Madame Harper,
Ms. Harper, since you have studied reconciliation with respect to the RCMP, do you think that approach, that is to say the red dress alert, should also be done with the police force, with law enforcement? Or should you leave more room to women and to Indigenous peoples in the management of that service? Does the police have a major role to play, Ms. North, as well, despite the harm that was done by the police in the past? And perhaps in terms of the criteria that should be added to the system. Because when you talk about criteria, it's very easy to sort of play about to establish whether or not there was discrimination.
Okay, for sure. The police have to be involved in the red dress alert. I mean, there's no way that the police cannot be a part of it. But they should not be the final and the sole authority on how it works. Who gets to push the button, as we say. Yeah, they definitely do have a role. And as far as what the role is and how much they play, that should be up to Indigenous groups. It should come from the grassroots communities and the families who are involved, who have lost women and girls to violence.
Merci, merci, Madame Harper.
Thank you, Ms. Harper. I don't know how much time I have left, Madam Chair. Ms. North, then. Amber Alert. Is it a good model that you should draw your inspiration from? And if not, can you model yourself after it?
The Amber Alert? Yeah, I think we can draw a lot from that. I think we can draw a lot from the experiences of the Amber Alert. I think we can draw experiences from the Silver Alert. We learned a little bit about some of that in some of the committees that led up to getting the Red Dress Alert established in the first place. And I think that there is a lot of good knowledge there and best practices. So we have a lot to learn. And again, I agree with everything that my colleagues here say about RCMP need to be involved, Winnipeg Police, all the other police forces, and also the First Nations police forces. They all need to have their hands on deck to support more than ever than they've ever done before.
Thank you, Ms. North. And now we move to Emanuela for 4 minutes.
So first of all, thank you all for your moving testimony. It was great to hear all of you, and I'm really sad that we're even in this situation that we have to invite you here to talk about this because of what the reality is out there. So we've touched on a lot of issues, and I think where I want to bring this is a little bit different. I don't want to talk about the Red Dress Alert today, even though everyone else has gotten great testimony out there, and I know that we're going to end up doing the right thing, especially in this committee. Everybody's unanimous on supporting it. But I want to talk about mental health being a major factor and at play here because Dr. Olson Harper, you also mentioned the fact that it starts in the home. A lot of these homes have violence because of the intergenerational trauma. And, you know, reconciliation is extremely important, but a big role that, well, one of the things that reconciliation can help to do is can help heal these people. And I think healing is really the answer, and it's at the core of the answer of what needs to be done. So I would like to hear from you on what you think is needed for Indigenous communities to heal.
Well, the first thing I would say is that culture is healing. I have heard that so often when I speak to the Indigenous male inmates, that the teachings that they receive from a program called Work to Give, that they grew up with little pieces of culture here and there, but they couldn't really live it out because of really poverty. And they were not accepted, as most of us aren't really, by the dominant society. But as such, if I were to answer that very simply, I would say it's going back to our culture, because we had those teachings, the holistic teachings that addressed our mental development, our spiritual development, our physical and emotional development. We need to go back to those ways. And of course, the landscape is not at all the same as it has been. It's changing constantly, so it needs constant work. But culture, our traditional cultures, is our healing paths. Miigwech.
I just want to know, would a federally funded program that really centers on Indigenous leaders being at the heart and at the center of the creation of the program, but a federally funded program that supports mental health in Indigenous communities, do you think that that would be helpful?
Yes.
Thank you. Now we have just 2 minutes left. We'll give 1 minute to Block and 1 minute to NDP. Just to start.
Wow, merci.
Wow. Thanks very much, Madam Chair. In 1 minute, I don't know which of the witnesses would like to answer. My question deals with the technical problems that an Amber Alert can involve, and also a red dress alert. There are many, many remote communities, so there can be technical difficulties. Do you have any solutions to those technical difficulties to propose?
Needs to now implement the proper infrastructure to support the access to the internet to all remote communities. This is all about all the social determinants of health. We don't live in a third world country anymore. We should be affording nations with everything that they need to have a proper participation in our country.
And that also just includes things like phones, like cell phones.
Thank you. Over to Leah.
Thank you so much. My last question is for you, Lori. We heard about policing. I wanted you to talk a little bit more about what oversight of policing looks like, considering the testimony we've heard today.
Absolutely. So, I mean, it's not oversight. It would be listening and taking direction.
Yeah.
And listening and taking direction from community and grassroots members who are dictating and expressing what needs to happen. And it's on the red dress alert, but it's also on the justice system as far as the other side, because there's those who are hunting and murdering us, right? And we need to follow through on that aspect of it as well. So I think there's two major roles for the justice service, the policing services to be involved in, but they should not be the decision makers.
Thank you. This concludes our first panel, and thank you all the witnesses for your great work and for your testimony. You always can submit your testimony to the clerk. Thank you. And now we need to suspend for a few minutes for our next panel. So, Tears to Hope Society, Lorna Brown, Executive Director, Denise Halfyard, Assistant Director. You can share your 5-minute testimony. We can start from Lorna Brown or Denise.
First, I want to acknowledge the Algonquin people whose unceded, unsurrendered traditional territory that we are doing this important business on. Hadi, my name is Lorna Brown. I am Wet'suwet'en, also the founder of and executive director of the Tears to Hope Society in Terrace, BC. We are first and foremost here as family members. My niece, Tamara Chipman, went missing in September of 2005 along the Highway of Tears, also known as from Prince Rupert to Prince George. The name of the Highway of Tears first started out when my cousin Florence Nizell started the very first Highway of Tears walk after my niece went missing. She had working with her niece, Karen Plasway. They wanted to come up with a name for her walk, and when they sat down and talked about so many women that were missing from our community of Witset, they started drawing tears, and from those tears, there were just so many, and they couldn't fit them all on the napkin. So they had suggested that, it's like a highway of tears. So that's just a little bit of background on where the name came from. There was a walk from Smithers to Prince George in 2006, and it was led into the 2006 symposium in Prince George, and that was led by Matilda Wilson. She's the mother of Ramona Wilson, who was found murdered near the Smithers Airport. She was 16 at the time, and this year marks 30 years since this family has had no answers. That will be coming up in June. My sister Gladys Raddick and Bernie Williams also continued the hard work that these family members started, and they organized 7 walks across Canada, starting in BC, to call for a national public inquiry into the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls across the country. Our families testified at the inquiry, and Tamara is still missing to this day, and we still have no answers, as do so many other family members. The number one thing we hear from family members is that they feel like their cases aren't being investigated or taken seriously. I'd like to add that missing men matter too. My cousin Phyllis Fleury has also been searching tirelessly for her 16-year-old son at the time, who went missing from Prince George. And, this is an issue that affects our men as well.
Hadi, my name is Denise Halfyard. I'm Lorna's oldest child, and I just want to say what a blessing it is to be able to do this important work alongside my mother. I'm the Assistant Director for the Tears to Hope Society, and we fully support the Red Dress Alert. The Tears to Hope Society has a support system with family members along the Highway of Tears. There's a lot of support for this alert, especially if it were to be implemented like the Amber Alert. Since the 231 recommendations were made, we continue to have our women targeted as they are still going missing or being found murdered. Some issues that were identified for this program: what is the criteria for a missing person? The definition is going to vary. Many families who go to the police are told to wait 24 hours. However, we know that this is not a true regulation, as the first 72 hours are the most important. But what is that threshold of time that allows us to, in fact, alert the public? Recently, a woman in the North was reported missing. She was active on social media, but had not been in direct contact with her loved ones who wanted proof that she was okay. How do we differentiate between someone who's not interested in being in contact with loved ones for various reasons with someone who is actually missing? Cell service continues to be an issue that gets raised. There are many areas that still don't have that service. North of Terrace, there is zero service unless you have personal Wi-Fi. So if an alert were to go out while I'm on any parts of those highways, I would have no idea who to look for because I wouldn't get the alert until it's too late. The Tears to Hope Society is working towards prevention of missing and murdered women and girls through education and taking care of your physical and mental health. When we are educated and are actively involved, we are more empowered. We believe we are stronger when we support one another because she is somebody. Masai.
Thank you for your testimony. Now we'll start the first round with Michelle. 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair Miigwech. Thank you guys so much. If you've traveled, you traveled here, so thank you very much for being here for our study on Red Dress Alert. Two things. Thank you for the work you do, first of all. These are the boots on the ground organizations that truly make impact and change, so truly grateful for that. Denise, if I can call you Denise, if that's okay. Two things really jumped out at me, what you said, because I think this study, what we really want to see come out of this study is how to effectively implement it. I think we've all agreed this is necessary, important, we were there. Now it's the sort of logistics. The threshold of time. Let's talk about this. If you have a recommendation that you'd like to see in the report, do you have one?
That's a difficult that's a difficult one just because it is important to get the word out right away. But we need to take into consideration these women that for safety reasons don't want to be found. But I think there's no problem with being alerted right away, whether they want to disappear or not. I think we need to err on the side of caution and better safe than sorry.
You took the next words out of my mouth, right? It's risk versus reward, I think, is often what you see. And I see this often in vulnerable people in general. You know, I have a mom in my riding, and her daughter lived on the street and dealt with severe mental illness, and she went missing, and nobody put it in the media. Nobody seemed to pay attention, you know, and I think she was her daughter, and we were able to get her home through social media, right? And but there's a stigma or shame, or if I'm putting that on social media, people are going to talk, oh, you know, I don't want people to know it's my family or that. But I think you have to look at a bigger picture, and I appreciate you putting that, you know, on the record. The other thing that you've said, and I think is really important when we look at this, are the dead zones in highways when you're traveling of cell service in remote areas. And a lot of these women and men, thank you, Lorna, for pointing that out, vulnerable folks, they're in these really rural parts of Canada. And so I'm wondering if you think a good idea would be maybe signage. If, you know, this is a dead cell phone, I guess people would already know it's a dead cell phone area, but how do we close that gap? You know, I think about when I traveled from from Banff to Jasper, that highway. And it's like one of the most dangerous highways. It was a snowy thing. There's not 1 ounce of cell service. What do you think we can do when we're trying to close that gap of notifying people? Are there any suggestions, or has there been any talk about that? Do you want?
I could address that. So we have a lot of industry in the north. Just about 70 kilometers from us is the largest LNG project in Canada. And there were a lot of announcements about all this new investment into cell phone services, and it's improved somewhat, but my daughter lives just 5 kilometers out of Terrace on the Kitsim-Kalem First Nation, and she doesn't get cell service there, and it's very scratchy. And so there definitely needs to be more of an investment into even to the communities, because we hear about all this investment, but our services are still very scratchy. So I think these companies that are making these promises need to follow through, because I know that they've, I won't mention the company, but, there's, all these promises, and I know that they use the word MMIWG to receive funding, and yet 5 kilometers out of our community, there's no proper cell phone service. So
I think you've hit an interesting point that needs to be put into this report. I mean, we've been promised working cell phone service since I worked in telecommunications, which was a long, long time ago. I know I look really young, but I'm not. I'm just kidding. No, just bringing some levity to this very serious topic. In all honesty, though, I think that is something that has to be put into this study, that the working cellular network is critical. Like this, it is critical to this. Just to add on to, I think one of the things when we look at how this is implemented, I just don't want it to get lost in the logistics, right? I've seen this so many times. Everybody agrees on a great idea, and then everybody kind of walks away from the table. It's like a group project. Yeah, no, that's great. And then you don't have that one person that is the implementer that gets it going, that makes it operate. You said Amber Alert. Do you think that the Amber Alert is the sort of the project to follow? Do you think that it's already been created, there's no need to reinvent the wheel, basically recreate sort of the same principles as Amber Alert?
Thank you. The time is over. You always can send us a written answer. Yeah, please. Now we have to move over to Mark. Mark, you got 6 minutes.
Along those lines, but before, I just want to make sure your testimony, because I think it's really important in the committee when we talk about cell coverage, because, let's name TELUS, Rogers, Bell, they have failed, Canadians. Let's be clear, they say that they cover, with the wireless industry, 98 to 90%, 99% of the Canadian population, which is a lie. So your testimony here in BC, like I have in Northern Ontario, there is not proper cell coverage. So this would be a strong recommendation for the committee to get these companies that are giving millions to shareholders to make sure they have proper cell coverage. So thank you for doing that. The other component here, like we talked about, you mentioned about the Amber Alert. We'll talk about the Silver Alert that we've had. How do we make this grassroots? Because we have, like in Northern Ontario, like BC, there's the Anishinaabe Police Force on reserve. You have in Ontario the Ontario Provincial Police, and then you have the municipal police. So how do we have a system, and recommendations do you have for us to have it grassroots led by Indigenous women especially, to ensure that these 3 levels of police do the proper alert, register alert, to make sure that the system works either locally, provincially, and then nationally? Any recommendations for us?
I think it needs to start out regionally. We know our women, we know our locations, like we know our areas, so we would have definitely a better idea of kind of the scope of where we're searching more than somebody, say, in Vancouver. They wouldn't know really where to look if they were there. As far as police involvement, I don't know if you want to speak to that.
Yeah, there definitely needs to be police involvement. However, again, I think it's been said before that it needs to be in collaboration with family members. And whether that's just consulting, having a committee to consult with on a regular basis so that they're being informed. And there definitely needs to be that communication, because again and again, we've heard that there's just a lack of communication in regards to families. So something like this that needs to be community-led, there definitely needs to be that. And like Denise said, starting out in the region, and then it could be spanned out from there.
Thank you. And we heard from a colleague here earlier to our other witnesses about mental health. Obviously, I think clearly on the committee here to ensure that the red dress alert is in place, Indigenous led by women, is going to be clearly recommendations that we're going to hear clearly from the committee. But I wanted also to ask you, when we talk about intergenerational, we look at residential survivors, child welfare, and not just women. There's men and men in general in the community. What are your recommendations related to mental health? What should we do as a federal government to support the red dress alert system linked to mental health services and programs?
I think it comes down to education again. A lot of people don't understand still what intergenerational trauma is. Even people who are actually going through it. So educating them and showing them this behavior is a result of your intergenerational trauma, and guiding them, giving them resources of how they can get that help that they need. But yeah, education for sure.
What is the link, municipalities? We talked about urban Indigenous. We have reserves. What role do you think that the municipalities, when we look at friendship centers, when we look at urban Indigenous, so we really got the rural aspect and they got the urban. Is there any specific recommendations you have along those lines?
In Terrace, we have a local friendship center because we're considered an urban center. Terrace is a hub to the northwest, and we have approximately 27 surrounding communities, First Nations communities, that all come to Terrace for their goods and services, and we're definitely lacking in that. In that area of even having any type of counseling that's available. Like, we don't have I know there's groups that have been advocating for a healing center or detox, and and for the amount of First Nations that we have in our area, it's quite shocking that there's nothing available. So the first place that you can get any type of help with is in Prince George, which is a 6 to 7 hour drive. And then there's certain criteria that has to be met before they can access any of those services. So I think the services need to be streamlined so that people can get help right away, because they might be ready to get help today, but next week it might be too late. And we know that personally, because I lost my sister last February, a year ago February, and she was wanting to get help, and she was, because of the red tape, and you had to travel and you had to jump through all of these hoops before she could get help. And then when it came down to it, it was too late. So we need to be able to streamline and cut out all the criteria to be able to get help. When somebody wants help, we should help them now, not next week or in 3 months or 6 months.
Thank you, Ms. Brown. Now we move to Andrew for 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Witnesses, if you'd like to put your earpieces on and select translation. Thank you so much for being here with us today. It is very important that you are speaking to your personal history, your family history of persons who have been missing and murdered. But also, it's not just missing girls and women. Also, there are boys and men who are missing. So thank you again. Having driven from Banff to Jasper, and Michelle just spoke about it, saying that there was no cell coverage at all. I'd like to hear what your solutions might be to that. How important do you think that it is, in addition to the red dress alert being added to your cell phone, finding a way to have cell coverage? There are truckers who have to be educated about the fight that exists to bring about awareness of missing and murdered women and girls. Posters, say, for example, that could be posted at airports. These are two examples I give you, but can you think of any other examples that would perhaps lead to better technological coverage?
I think you make a really good point about the truckers being educated and being an assistant to this. So my cousin Tamara, who has been missing, her dad, Tom, is a trucker. And he trucks from Terrace to Alberta, sometimes into Saskatchewan, quite regularly. So I think, yeah, that would definitely be a huge help in using their network to help get the word out when a woman does go missing. I think there also being a proper active list of women that are missing based on location. So if I was to be, say, in Winnipeg and I see an active list of who's missing, then I know who to look out for. Of course, that would be voluntary for anybody who wants to look into that, but I think you'd find that those of us that are doing the work already, it's something that we would definitely look into.
Have you anything to add, Ms. Brown? Or should I move on to my next question?
Parfait. Vous avez parlé de la loi.
You also spoke about another interesting aspect, that is that other services have to be offered in terms, in a word, greater education that would allow for a better grasp of the goal of the red dress alert. Services should be offered as well to the survivors and to the families. In the previous panel, we spoke about recurring funding. The witnesses drew our attention to that there should be foreseeability, predictability in terms of funding. In other words, that it should be a recurring funding that would be offered to organizations, not just a one-off type of funding. Would that be good for the Red Dress Alert program?
Yep, 100% that there needs to be funding, because we can have all of these meetings, and I know it's been a frustration for family members is that we're always having meetings, but very little action is actually happening. So to be able to have funding for a call center, or like whatever that looks like, for a red dress alert, and to be able to implement it and train people, whether they're family members or other Indigenous people or working with non-Indigenous people as well. but having a full balance of, committee members, like whether that's where we are, it's our CMP or different policing. But yeah, everything, it costs money to run these organizations, and we need to be able to just act on that and come up with a plan that's actually going to work and then implement it, and then there needs to be continuous funding.
Donc, do you have anything to add to what has just been said?
Everything.
Thank you. Now
Donc, ce que je comprends un petit peu pour terminer,
Just to conclude, to reduce the administrative burden, the money has to be there. It has to be guaranteed. It has to be recurring. These are the two aspects that are important.
over to Leah. Leah, you got 6 minutes.
Thank you so much, and thank you for traveling so far to be with us in committee today. And also, thank you for sharing stories about your family. I know those stories are difficult and painful to share. If Lorna Brown, you mentioned that, like the territory you're from, there is resource extraction. Would you say that there is a lot of sex trafficking that's happening out of those resource extraction sites, or sexual exploitation?
Yep, absolutely. We have heard so many stories of sometimes really young girls, as young as like 15, being held up in hotel rooms for like 2 and 3 days at a time. They're picking up young girls and doing whatever they want with them.
So,
and we're also finding that there's also a lot of foreigners that are new to the country that are also coming in and picking up our young girls and doing the same thing. So it's not just, it is extraction, but it's the industry, but it's also new people coming into the country.
I asked that our committee actually did a study on the connection between extractive industries and increased violence against Indigenous women and girls. I asked that question because you also shared, and I'll let you answer as well, the fact that companies are coming in, not taking proper safety precautions, and also using the ongoing genocide against Indigenous women and girls for financial purposes. Can you expand briefly on that? And then I have another follow-up question. That's because it's deeply troubling.
Yeah, it's interesting because I know in the one project, because I do have sons that work in the industry, and obviously not every single person is a perpetrator, but he said to me, he goes, "Oh, I saw you on our training video this morning," and I'm like, "Oh, really?" And I wasn't even aware, because of the work that we do on the Highway of Tears. It is used in industry to train, but when we actually try to hold the companies accountable, to see what they're actually doing. And, I think of an example. There was a few years ago where my sister got word of a perpetrator that had assaulted a police officer a female police officer in Kamloops, I believe. And he was actually employed with this company in Kitimat, and a bunch of just grassroots women went there and held the companies accountable for. Mm-hmm.
Just because I have limited time, and like I said in the study, this isn't about how you feel about resource extraction. It's about, whether there's resource extraction or not, it needs to be safe, and it's not safe for women and girls wherever you sit on that issue. I ask that because there's dead zones. First of all, there's dead cell zones. The second issue is that companies come in, they promise these digital technologies, companies that are already not taking precautions to make sure women and girls are safe, not fulfilling their problems. How is it important to put in legislation to hold these companies accountable? Particularly because these agreements are generally made, sometimes tripartite, federal, provincial, with the company, to hold them accountable to things like ensuring digital technology, holding governments to account to make sure, as a human rights matter, that there aren't dead zones. How is this critical if we are going to, in light of the extreme violence and sex trafficking, particularly in your area, make sure that women are safe and can participate in a red dress equally as other people in different regions across the country?
Yeah, you bring up a really good point, because I have an Indigenous woman that I know is actually holding the company accountable directly. So our women need support in doing that, so that whether that comes from a government level, she is now fighting on her own as a personal, just one person, right? So they definitely need to be held accountable for not providing a safe environment.
So I feel concerned because this is really quite a serious human rights matter. Like, we have all this money to support industry and building, and we can't build cell phone towers to make sure that all the women going missing on the Highway of Tears can, if they're abducted, they literally have no way to communicate. That was what first came to mind. If they are trying to escape, it's like there is nowhere for them to go in the boondocks with no technology. How urgent is this?
Extremely urgent.
And we've known about the Highway of Tears forever. What is the feeling?
Thank you, Leah.
Sorry.
Time is. Now we are starting next panel because of the time. What we do, 3 minutes, Anna, 3 minutes, Lisa, and then 2 minutes block, 2 minutes NDP. So we'll start with Anna. 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'm going to share the last bit of my time with Dominique. So first of all, I want to congratulate you, Mrs. Brown, on your film, and your daughter on her radio show, Like Mom, Like Daughter. Congratulations. Wow. You're an inspiration to all moms. One of the things I do want to ask is, Ms. Brown, you mentioned earlier, and I'd like you to please expand on the comment that you made about little action.
Well, again, it's where is the accountability? And we all, we hear it from the family members, and they say, there's the 231 recommendations. Can we bite off like 6 or 7 of those and just implement them? So it's just an extreme frustration that very little has been done. And I don't know that there's enough. There seems to be, it's very fragmented across the country as to who is speaking for the missing and murdered women and girls, like the families, like who is actually holding government accountable for implementing these calls to justice.
Would you say less talk, more action? I think that's what we're looking for.
Yes.
But the other question I want to refer to your lovely daughter, Denise. You do look like your mom, by the way. Do you use your radio show to help identify murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls? Because I've watched it. I went through it. Love the music.
Oh.
Just love it. Sorry.
Yeah, no. I do, actually. So every week has a different theme, and especially around days of interest for MMIWG, February 14th, May 5th, even events that we coordinate. I do bring attention to missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls through song. There's a lot of artists out there that are also using their voices to amplify this message, and and not just in Canada, but into the States as well. There's a lot of artists, so.
Thank you for, I don't want to cut you off, I'm sorry, but I promised Dominique because she had something very important to ask. Thank you so much, ladies.
Merci, Anna. Merci.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you, Chair. I do have a question. Denise, can you hear me? You answered my colleague earlier with respect to an Amber Alert. What should be the territory? You answered, let's begin by the regional level. We'll start with the regional level and extend it beyond that afterwards. Can you tell us what you think this regional area should be so we understand it? Should be at the provincial level, at the reserve level, or should be an administrative entity?
Just quick answer, please.
Okay, I think it should be by population. The Vancouver area they definitely look out for each other. I think especially if we're to do something like that regionally in the Terrace area, it would cover the Highway of Tears.
Thank you. Now we move over to Lisa. You got 3 minutes.
Thank you. And I'll just pick up on the same vein because we really at this committee we're trying to nail down how this we all agree there should be a red dress alert. It should be Indigenous led. So what does that look like? And I've heard several witnesses, including you, talk about the Amber Alert and how it maybe should be similar. So we had the Pelmorex is the company that operates the red dress alert system in Canada. They also do the silver alert system. They also operate the weather network. So I always just call them the weather network. And they told us, so they operate those for free as part of their broadcasting licenses. But what happens for those alerts is the threshold to decide whether or not to call it, that goes to police. And I think what we've heard at this committee is that it should be a consortium of Indigenous leaders, Indigenous women who make that decision. I think that's the key decision, right? In all those instances, what's the threshold? How do we decide if this is someone that even wants to be found or if it's someone we need to look for right now? And I like your idea of it being regional to start with. So could you see a system where we had regional bodies of Indigenous, particularly women, who oversee the initial contact and then, like, can you see where I'm kind of getting? And then where do police fit in? Where do they fit in at all? Is there a role for police? But just maybe if you could hash out where we're getting to at this committee with this red dress alert system.
Bring up the weather network because that's exactly kind of the model I was thinking of, where you can choose different destinations to follow, as well as the default is wherever you are at that moment. So I think that's a great option there. As far as police goes, I think whoever the let's say committee, for lack of a better word, would be leading this in their region, they should just be called upon and utilized as they see fit.
So it would be the committee making the original decision and then they would reach out to police for tactical support kind of thing?
Yeah, assistance, because every region is different. Everybody has different relationships with police. Some are very close, some aren't. So I think, it comes down to being regional and whatever your relationship is.
Lorna, do you have anything to add? Any other ideas of how this would roll out? And we've talked about how there are many different types of police services in Canada, depending on where you live in the country. Do you have anything more to add on whether we need more Indigenous policing resources to support this work?
Again, I mentioned how we have the highest population, I think, in BC of First Nations people, and I don't know that we even have any Indigenous police. Like it's not in northern BC. So for the amount of population, we definitely need more Indigenous police, and also just having that connection with I've recently met with some new police officers in Terrace, and I think that they're trying to change that. They recognize that they have failed in the area of trust, and so, but they're very, very new. So we'll see how that plays out. But yeah, definitely needs more Indigenous policing for sure.
Thank you, Ms.
Clearly,
Brown.
the work you're doing is
Thank you.
getting out and doing some good. So thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Now we'll move over to Andrew. 2 minutes, Andrew.
Adrienne. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Ladies, watching you this morning, I'll just add to what my colleague already said. Lorna, Denise, you have inspired me. I have a granddaughter who's 2.5 years old, and I can tell you that you are an inspiration to me, and I hope to her. You have, my colleague Leah spoke about the exploitation of resources when they extract resources, and we've heard a great deal in other venues about the exploitation of women. Do you have further information to give us about the extraction industry and women?
I can answer to that. Other than, we look at the northeast of BC. It's not officially the Highway of Tears, but the Dawson Creek area where so many girls and some men are going missing. I have a friend a friend who has 2 family members missing, and they went missing less than a year apart. It's been an issue with extraction, and it continues to happen, and so these companies need to be held accountable more accountable for so many that are still going missing and are being affected in violent ways.
Thank you, Ms. Brown. And now we just turn over to Leah for 2 minutes.
Thank you so much, Chair. And Madame Brown, you spoke about complicated relationships with police, and I know the UN has noted a number of human rights violations that have been perpetrated by the RCMP within your territory. So I want to honor that. My question is for you, Denise Hatfield. You spoke about criteria. What is the criteria for issuing an alert? I say that because you shared about a young woman, a young girl who was held captive for 4 days. My question in that case, was there an alert sent? Did anybody look for her in that case? And if you can expand on the need to put in place very clear criteria, especially with minors that are going missing.
So with that situation, I'm not aware that anybody, because nothing has been really in place, like we're such a grassroots organization that I only heard this in community, and the community member was a business owner that witnessed this, and so yeah, there is nothing in place. So we're starting from the ground up to be able to implement something that's going to keep this young girl safe.
So would you say a lot of young people and women go missing without kind of a trace or concern currently in your area? I'm not talking about the community. I'm talking about authorities that are supposed to be there to protect us.
Yeah, there's really no, and I know this for a fact from community workers who have tried to assist younger women and girls. There is nothing in place, and even when they do get reported missing, it's just not taken seriously.
So is that the reason why it needs to be the oversight or whatever we want to call it needs to happen for Indigenous by Indigenous folks within regional areas?
100%.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. On behalf of the committee, thank you for your testimony, and sorry about the technical difficulty and delays. You always can submit your testimony in the writing if you want to say you want to answer some questions. So with that, we conclude this meeting, and I want to adjourn. It's the will of the committee to adjourn the meeting. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.